Policing in America has been under intense scrutiny these past few years. From BLM to George Floyd, there have been intense calls for oversight and reform across the country. Such calls are valid in their desire for change, and while the reforms demanded are broad in their scope, there is one component of policing often overlooked by these movements: police dogs. Whether you're going for a walk or taking a drive, there's a reasonable chance you'll come across a canine officer. Using dogs for police work, specifically for detecting drugs and contraband, has been commonplace in the States for decades. Fundamentally, this makes sense. Dogs have an extremely keen sense of smell that can be trained to detect target scents, which has helped keep illegal firearms, explosives, and drugs off the streets. In spite of the benefits police dogs provide, they possess an equal, if not greater, number of problems, such as inaccuracy, poor training, and over-reliance on by the courts. As calls for police reform increase, it is best that all issues be discussed, including the problem with police dogs. Before discussing the overall issues with police dogs, it's worth looking at how they got there in the first place. Using dogs as helpers or servants goes back centuries, with some of the first documented usages dating back to the 1600s. Individuals traversing the Alps would at times be trapped in the snow from storms or avalanches, and local monks would train St. Bernards to find and assist those in need. This ability to locate and track individuals would lead to their police application in the 19th century, when bloodhounds were used to track Jack the Ripper. These dogs weren't the best, but police dogs and canine units gradually improved and gained wider adoption throughout Europe. Realizing they could be used to track more than human scents, canine specialists began training dogs in detecting explosives, leading to their use in detecting mines during World War II. The same principle would be extended to other areas, such as sniffing out drugs, invasive species, and even cancer. By the 1970s, police dogs and canine units used for the detection of contraband became common throughout the United States, for better and for worse. Canines, much like humans, are fallible. During a drug sniff, false positives and false negatives are to be expected. With dogs, however, you often get substantially more false positives than negatives. This is due to their incredible sense of smell, which can let them detect extremely trace amounts of a target material that may have appeared randomly or trace remainders after its removal. In terms of search and rescue or bomb-sniffing dogs, this is preferable to the alternative. It's better that they spend more time double-checking an area rather than let people die in an avalanche or have C4 cross the border. That being said, this false positive issue becomes much greater when you take into account their police application. Quite simply put, police dogs are really inaccurate. Looking specifically at the numbers, the efficacy of police dogs varies wildly from study to study, but very few of them speak well to their abilities. In analyses of hit rate, police dogs seldom get above 50% accuracy, meaning the majority of their searches yield absolutely nothing. These numbers are just not good. But why are they like this? The issue of police dog inaccuracy is in some ways immutable. You simply can't expect dogs to have perfect hit rates. However, the administration and management of canines leaves much to be desired. For starters, dogs don't have to be dismissed or retrained for having abysmal statistics. Much like the police in general, there really isn't any internal oversight or consequences for being awful at your job. Training for police dogs is also an issue, in that it is neither standardized nor effective. As it stands, only a few states have any sort of set standards, and there are no federal regulations regarding training either. Because of this, not all dogs are created equal, leading in part to their poor accuracies and unreliability. Another issue is the fact that police dogs are readily influenced by their handlers. Ultimately, dogs try to please their masters in one way or another, and often feed off the subtle cues they detect. In line with this, studies have shown that dogs will often alert for the presence of drugs or contraband if their handler thinks they'll find it. In other words, the biases of handlers influence their dogs, whether they're aware of it or not, and this influence further muddies the actual utility of police dogs. Bottom line is that police dogs aren't fulfilling their intended role, assuming they can even do so in the first place, and the civilian consequences have proven substantial. From a legal perspective, an alert from a dog translates to carte blanche both during searches and in the courtroom. The Supreme Court ruled in 2005 that an alert from a police dog gives probable cause for a search and seizure. This would be fine if police dogs were, accurate, but instead it typically leads to an unnecessary search or a vehicle impoundment. I'm not trying to get all political here, but the police aren't held in very high regard right now. Having a program or system that more often than not harangues innocent civilians probably isn't helping their public image. The Supreme Court issued another ruling in 2013 where they further elaborated on police dog usage. A singular standard was set for dogs to be considered reliable, that being they pass an annual examination of their abilities. They also allowed for sniff tests to be thrown out if the dog in question is proven to be inaccurate or unfit. Again, this would be fine if training programs or incident reports were held to literally any level of scrutiny. They just aren't. All in all, the legal system places an abnormal amount of faith in the testimony of dogs, much to the dismay of the citizenry. Thus far, we've looked at the civil and legal implications of police dogs. Though quite important, they are just one half of the overall issue. At the end of the day, police dogs are animals. Descended from wolves over millennia, dogs have been bred to fill particular roles. In a policing context, their role often involves subduing fleeing targets or suspects. Unfortunately, the aforementioned issues of poor training and officer error often lead to severe consequences. Police dogs are usually German Shepherds or Belgian Malinois. These dogs are fast and strong, with an incredibly powerful bite. It's a bite strong enough to tear skin, or maim a limb, or outright kill a man. Police brutality is sickeningly common in the US, and police dogs are just another component of this gross phenomenon. Rather than using dogs solely to subdue active threats, they are frequently used against the unarmed or non-compliant. In addition, if the dog is poorly trained or led by an incompetent handler, needless and excessive injury is often the result. Much like their legal issues, the physical threat of police dogs is often downplayed, ignored, or outright excused. The problems with police dogs are both serious and multifaceted. The most pressing issue is the fact drug dogs are embarrassingly inaccurate, so implementing proper and standardized training for dogs is absolutely necessary. That, and keeping dogs proven to be inaccurate off the streets. Speaking of the streets, dogs shouldn't be wantonly brought out on patrols. We can have them checking border crossings or government buildings, but they don't need to be busting 19-year-olds with a bag of weed or sending people to the hospital. Finally, there's this really cool concept called innocent until proven guilty, which weirdly gets thrown out whenever a domesticated animal says so. Unless a dog can be shown to be reasonably accurate, or until dogs in general prove more reliable, they shouldn't be used or trusted in a court of law. At the end of the day, policing and criminal justice both need to be addressed in America. Movements have been spurred to remedy the issue, but every single aspect needs to be considered. Police dogs, as cuddly and innocuous as they may appear, are just another component of a greater issue, one that can hopefully be addressed with all the others. Thanks for reaching the end. I plan to have a short discussion on police dogs and the video itself, but before getting into that, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video or learned something new. This won't be the last discussion of a niche or interesting topic on this channel. With that out of the way, I wanted to give some of my personal thoughts on this topic. The thing that struck me the most during research was how sinister the use of police dogs is. I don't see sinister in an explicitly evil or malicious sense, but in how easily the severe issues associated with police dogs are concealed, if not outright defended. Most people view dogs positively, as loyal creatures devoid of man's moral failings. Fundamentally, this is a true statement, and such virtues are often paraded about on social media or in press conferences to prop up the use of police dogs. This is even seen in the courtroom, where people have an innate bias towards dogs, leading to unearned trust towards their use and testimony. This all obfuscates the fundamental issue, that these virtuous animals are often led by the morally dubious. Ultimately, these appeals are based more so on emotion and a carefully curated image, not the actual facts of the matter, which is depressing to say the least. My only hope is that the problems with police dogs can be brought to greater public light, that we can look past the dogs and focus on the ones holding the leash, and have this issue be remedied at last. To that end, please share the video around. Of all the people I spoke to regarding police dogs, they were often viewed as something benign, unaware as to these problems associated with them. With that, however, thank you once again for reaching the end, and take care.